China's a great place for us understanding where all this technology is going because they're actually more advanced than us in media technology. I mean, when I do a TV show in China, 70% of the people who watch my shows watch it on a cell phone, which has really caused us to rethink how you produce stuff.
Larry Naemar.
Larry Naemar.
Mr. Larry Naemar.
Larry is the co-founder of E! Entertainment Television.
He's also the founder of LJ in Media and a global force in bridging Western and Eastern Europe entertainment markets.
Please welcome the unstoppable Larry Naemar.
Hey, great. Good morning.
Good morning, good evening, wherever we're at. So I have a little note here about you, Larry, and I just want to double check that this is correct. Before co-founding the TV network E! Entertainment, Larry, you were actually a cable splicer for a utility company in New York, climbing telephone poles, getting your hands dirty, and dreaming about how cable could be more than just TV. And this kind of led to the evolution of E! Entertainment. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true, except that in Manhattan we didn't have telephone poles. All the wires were under the streets of New York City, and my job was to go under the streets into the sewers with the rats and the roaches and splice the cables back together. And so that's where I did start.
How old were you then?
I literally was right out of college. I found that with my economics degree, I really couldn't get a job. And so I took what I thought was going to be just a temporary job. I knew somebody who was in the electrical workers union, and they said, "Hey, we just organized this thing. It's called cable TV. Not sure anybody will ever pay for television, but here's the shop steward's name and number, and call them up and tell them the union sent you, and they'll give you this job." So I mean, that's what I did, and I didn't even get a job as a splicer. I was the assistant splicer, and they paid me. I was getting $90 a week.
So what year was that?
That was 71.
Take us back to the moment. What about that kind of inspired you to see more of what cable television could be?
Well, I started splicing the cables together, and it was kind of odd because I was probably the only one in the technical or the field side of the company with a college degree. And, it was funny because the union guys would look at me, they go, "Hey, kid, you're using the equipment after only 1 week, and it usually takes people a year. How did you do that?" And I'm going like, I read the instruction booklet. It wasn't rocket science. But then, so I went very quickly from being the assistant splicer to the splicer, and then they moved me to I became a construction guy, and then an installer, and then a service guy. So I moved up through the technical departments really, really quickly. I mean, within a year, I was out of the sewers, and I was like now a serviceman, fixing all the wires that, theoretically was supposed to put together. And, at that time, there were 17 channels. It was really clunky. It was even before remote controls, where you had to literally go to the television and change channels and do that stuff. And I just became, a little bit fascinated with it. And then I guess, the real turning point, for me was the company got bought by Time Incorporated before Time Warner. So it was basically a publishing company, but they had made this decision that over 10 years they were going to move from being a publishing company to becoming a media company. So it was really a great time to be there because they started to focus on this company that they bought, which you had all the Harvard and Yaleys, and they really didn't understand what these guys do when they go under the streets every day and stuff. And and then what happened was the union guys who were amazed that I knew how to use the equipment so quickly. They had a union contract to negotiate, and they knew they were negotiating against all these guys with like fancy degrees from Harvard and Yale and Stanford, and they said, "Hey, kid, we're going to put you on the negotiating committee for the union contract." And they did that, and we did quite well. And after we did that contract, they said, "We love your help on the contract. We're going to make you the vice chairman of the Cable TV Workers Union." And I was like, I was like 23 years old, and here I was, the vice chairman of a union. And then Time Inc. put a a guy in one of their chosen ones, a guy that they knew was going to move up the ladder, but they wanted him to learn, the cable business. They put in a guy named Nick Nicholas, who eventually went on to become the chairman of Time Warner. They put him in as president, and he found that it was easy to talk to me. Larry, explain to me what these guys do. I don't understand it, and he realized that I know how to read a balance sheet, and I had skills that most of the technical guys necessarily didn't have. And he just finally kept after me to go into management. So I left the union and went into management, and then very quickly I was 25, I became the director of operations in Manhattan, which is the biggest cable system in the country. And I was 25, and I had all the technical departments reporting to me. 300 and some odd people. Well, most of them are older, so it was a great lesson in learning how to manage. And but it was a great time to be there because that's when we started. We were the first ones to use satellites. Nobody even thought of it. And we started HBO and Cinemax and brought up cable companies from all around the country and then the world, for that matter. And so it was good to be there.
For the listeners, satellites were big things that people put in their backyards at the time, right? So they could get cable. Is that what you're referring to?
It says satellite dishes, but no, we're talking, satellites are these things that fly around the earth that the signals come down from and land on those dishes. And, that wasn't used before. I mean, it was a brand new technology. And, there was a guy named Jerry Levin who really started it when he came up with the idea for HBO. And he was talking about hey, we're going to use these satellites and we're going to beam movies all throughout the country. And we thought he was crazy, going, so what the hell, who's going to put those dishes up? And,
right.
He was right, and we didn't have the same kind of vision that he did.
People did, and that's now something of the past. Because I remember as a kid seeing in the backyard some of my friends' homes or the neighborhood homes with satellite, those big ones in the backyard,
Yeah, that was them. But, satellites are, they're very common now, and people don't realize, you just look at, the system that Elon Musk has up there, doing all this telephony and data communications and stuff. It's all satellite. It's just become very invisible. Yeah. You don't need those dishes anymore. They basically beam them down to a central place, and then they redistribute it over, more traditional landlines or the internet or something like that. But satellites are just a part of our daily life.
Well, take us to the point, Larry, or maybe or fast forward to where E came into the picture. And I know before it was E, you had a name for a couple of years. Movie Time, right?
Yeah, it was. So it was funny because kind of after, being in, Manhattan, director of operations, and having all that report to me, most of the big cities, right around 1980, the big cities all began to think that, hey, cable is more than just good reception. We need it for to expand the number of channels people get, for data communications, for all kinds of other uses. And the cities all began to issue franchises for people to build cable systems. But the caveat was most of the big cities didn't want the cables to go on telephone poles because essentially it's unsightly. They all wanted them to go underground. Well, fortunate for me, the only person around who knew how to build underground cable was me, because there was only one underground cable system built in the country, and that was Manhattan. So a Canadian company won the franchise for Los Angeles, for the San Fernando Valley. And they, I got a call from a recruiter saying this company would like to talk to you. They have to build this cable system in LA underground, and, they need somebody with your qualifications. And I was like, no, I'm not, I'm a Brooklyn kid. I'm not going to La La Land, and, I'm just not doing that. And then finally the chairman of the Canadian company called me and said, listen, we really want to talk to you. And I said, I have no interest in your job whatsoever. And he goes, listen, I'll fly you to LA first class. I'll put you in the Bel Air Hotel for the weekend. Think of it as a vacation. You got to give me 1 hour. And I went, as long as you understand, there's no way I'm taking that job. And he said, great, okay. So I did that, and I was a total ass. I'm going, your 1 hour starts now. You got 50 minutes left, 40 minutes left. And then after the hour, the guy said, well, what would it take for you to move out here? And I said, well, I named like 4 times what I make in New York, and I demanded Liberace's old house and a car with a mobile phone. I just figured, let me just name all these things that he can never say yes to. And then I leave. So I name it, and he goes, look, you're out of your mind. I went, exactly, goodbye. And, that was it. And I went back to New York, and it was winter. And, New York is wonderful on snowy days, the first day. But the second day, it's all black gook. And, here I am in my fancy suit, walking to work, and a cab comes by and splashes me with all this black stuff. And I'm like going, you know what? California really wasn't that bad. I said, I don't really like this. And I get to work, and, my assistant says, oh, that guy from Canada called you again, because he's been calling me all the time. And, I get on the phone, and he goes, listen, what you asked for is outrageous, but how quick could you be here? And, so then I kind of had my foot in my mouth. So I left Manhattan, I moved to LA. I built Valley Cable, which was the first 61-channel two-way cable system ever built. But it was interesting for me because then I was now in charge of everything. So I had finance and I had programming and I had marketing, not just technical groups. So I had to learn all that stuff. But, when you're a Brooklyn kid and you're out in LA and everybody's going to parties and premieres and meeting celebrities and stuff, I called up the studios and said, hey, put me on those lists. And they said, nah, you're a utility. You're like the gas company. We're not putting you on. And then finally I met somebody who was in marketing at one of the studios. I think it was Universal. And I said, listen, I'm confused. The best part of a movie is typically the movie trailer. And the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm in the movies. I said, wouldn't you want me to see that while I'm at home to make me want to go to the movies? And they went, yeah, but those are 2 minutes and it's very expensive to put them on TV. I said, tell you what, you give me the movie trailers, I'll put them on TV for free, but you put me on the list. And they went, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And we did that. But then when I started doing audience surveys, what's your favorite channel? People go, I love CNN, I love MTV, I love that trailer channel. And I'm going, wait a second, I'm getting the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie for free, and people love it as much as they love these big, expensive channels. And then the company from Canada sold out, and they went back to Toronto, and they said, Larry, when are you going to be here? And I went, no. I said, I didn't go from New York to LA to go to Toronto. I said, I'm done with cold. So I stayed in LA, and me and my friend Alan Marufka, we just said, let's kick around ideas to help us stay in LA. And he was from New Jersey. And, Alan said, I've been playing with this idea of Entertainment Tonight 24 hours a day. And I go, wait a second, when you think of MTV, they stand a host in front of a green screen and go, and they go, and Madonna has a new video. I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and go, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. Basically use the trailers the way MTV was using music videos, which they got for free from the record companies. We said we could get the trailers from movies for free from the movie studios. And so we wrote a plan. We thought we were brilliant. At that time, the going cost to start a TV network was somewhere between $60 and $100 million. And never before has anybody other than a big media company ever started a TV network, of scale. And so we wrote the plan. We thought we were brilliant. 3.5 years later, we weren't able to raise a dime. And then, because everybody would say, well, you're not Time Warner, you're not Fox, you're not Disney. You can't start. People don't start TV networks. And so finally, we met a guy who was at a bond house on Wall Street that just started investment banking. And we pitched it to him, and he said, I love this. I used to be the entertainment reporter for my college newspaper, and I really like it, and I'm going to give you money. And I'm like, great, can you give us more like the 100? Because we have all these ideas of what we want to do. He goes, oh, no. He goes, I can't do anything like that. I'm only allowed to sign for 2.5. And I'm like, well, what are we supposed to do with 2.5? I mean, the lowest amount we need is 60. And he goes, well, I can't sign for that. And Al and I just looked at each other and said, you know what? it's clear nobody's giving us 60 or 100 or anything like that. So we took the 2.5. We signed the deal. And I had a friend that was teaching radio, television, film at University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up and said, Brian, do you have kids who need intern jobs? And he said, yeah, we had a lot of trouble placing kids this year. And this was like in the summer. I said, send me all of them. Send me everyone you got. So he sent us 31 interns. And people don't realize, because he is now a monster. It's 142 countries and one of the biggest TV networks in the world. But he started with 11 employees and 31 interns and $2.5 million.
Wow. Can I interrupt you here? Because I have a couple questions before we dive more into E. I want to go back to the negotiations when you were a young man and you went out to LA and you were giving all the terms, having Liberace's house and all these things. What do you think gave you the confidence to lay down that type of negotiation? And then what did you end up settling on by the time you went out to LA?
It was... I was just dead set that, again, I was a poor Brooklyn kid. I grew up in Coney Island, which is still the hood. It's a part of Brooklyn that hasn't been gentrified yet. And the thought of, my parents' aspiration for me was to get a civil service job and be able to retire at 65 and stuff. So I didn't come from a background that was aspirational or, I didn't aspire to certain things. So, but I was pretty set in New York. I was loving New York. I had a great job in Manhattan. I had gotten an apartment in Manhattan for the first, when you grow up in Brooklyn, you can't wait till you make enough money to move to the city. I finally did that. And, so I was all set. I was a New Yorker, and I just loved New York. I still love New York. And I said, let me just come up with stuff that there's no way they could possibly say yes to. The salary I knew, would be somewhat negotiable. I said, but, I had learned that Liberace had moved from LA to Las Vegas in his house, which was on the front, which was kind of at the opening of Entertainment Tonight every night, the piano-shaped swimming pool. I said, how cool would it be to have I just named stuff that I said they can't say yes to. But eventually, and, in between, the guy would call me and go, okay, what you asked for is ridiculous, but we could offer you X. And literally it would be like twice what I'm making in Manhattan. And, being not so smart, I would go, well, you asked me what it would take. I told you what it would take. I said I wasn't negotiating with you. Thank you for the offer, but no. And then I hang up and I'm going, am I being dumb or what? And, literally we settled on everything that I asked for, they gave me. They gave me the big salary. They got me Liberace's house for a year to live in.
Wow.
They got me a car with a mobile phone, not even a cell phone, a mobile phone. It was crazy.
They really wanted you. Okay. So regarding your skills to be able to, to make that transition and to do that, I'm curious, you kind of came, at least you mentioned you came from humble beginnings. Your parents didn't have big aspirations for you, right? Do you think it was just a lot of the right place for the right time? Or do you think you have a bit of luck that you've always, maybe naturally been gifted with? Or do you think it was like because you're more intelligent than most people?
I think it's probably a combination of the two. Number one, I have a very high IQ, but I was a total in high school. They sent me to a psychiatrist to find out why I have such a high IQ but low grades. And in college, I was a straight C student. So, nothing there. But, again, and people were confounded because the IQ was pretty high. But, I think it's a combination of all. I was in a great place for somebody with my background. But the thing that, again, to this day, nobody could figure out, but it's followed me for my whole career, is I was always interested in what can be as opposed to what was. I was always looking for, going, what like 80s music is great, but, like what's happening and, what's Kanye West singing these days? And I was always looking more to the future than the past. I still appreciate things from the past. But, that's it. So from E, and again, for me, E wasn't rocket science. And we started, the name was Movie Time at the beginning because we relied on these movie trailers because we had no money for anything else. But when we looked at it, you're going back to the '80s now, and I used to think, I said, cable TV is really an electronic newspaper. I mean, CNN was the headlines, ESPN was the sports pages. I said, but what's missing is the second most read section of any Sunday newspaper, which was the entertainment pages. And that's where we started. We said we're going to create the entertainment pages of the cable TV newsletter, and also just looking at it, we said outside of the U.S., nobody's really interested in NFL football. People who are living in Paris couldn't care less about what's the weather going to be in New York tomorrow. Well, we said, but the interest in Hollywood and celebrities is global. It's actually bigger than, the potential is bigger than ESPN or sports or, any of that stuff. And, so for Alan and I, it wasn't a surprise. I mean, when we finally got some money, we went on the air. Everybody said, "Oh my God, that's what you wanted to do. You should have told us 3 years ago." But we knew that this was, as big as anything out there and stuff. So we just kept pursuing it. But even after that, I just identified. I said, look, Hollywood is it's not a geographic place anymore. Technology has brought the cost of production down so much that you could produce stuff anywhere. And again, having an economics degree did help, because I'm one of the few people who understood the technical side of the business, but also knew how to read a balance sheet. So it kind of made me a little bit dangerous in Hollywood in those days. But I looked at the cost of production. There was a time where you needed giant sound stages, and cameras were like it was $250,000 to buy a broadcast quality camera. And, and those cameras are not as good as my iPhone today. So people who wanted to do anything visual had to come to Hollywood. That's why the movies were made here and everything. But as technology began to catch up and those costs came down, I said, Hollywood is real. It's really a level of creativity. It's a level of quality, but it's no longer the geographic center. So that's why I really went out and looked at building the international side of the building. I said, I have a subject matter that people around the world all identify with. Everybody loves Hollywood and Hollywood movies and stuff, and they're still revered. So we really started with the first ones to build international, because we just said, this is the way it's going to be. I mean, I could take my iPhone and go to Africa tomorrow and make a movie. That'll be as good as something that I could have done, back at the beginning, with the big expensive equipment if I did it in Hollywood. So, but so it's really a combination of being in the right place. It's a combination of having that vision for whatever reason of, not like tell me about what was, but what's next.
I love that. Okay, let's go back to starting E, and you've got $2.5 million, 31 interns, and I think 11 employees, and you needed 60 to 100 million, but you had 2.5. So how'd you make it work?
Well, we looked at this whole thing. We looked at MTV, and here they are spending, as part of Viacom at the point, they're spending millions on research and stuff. And we just said, you know what, we don't have the money for the research. Let's just copy what they do. So, they started with short form programming. They started with music videos, which the business model is they get a music video for free because the music companies wanted to promote the music in concerts and record sales. But yet they would send this host in front of a green screen, very simple, very inexpensive to do. And they would point to the green screen and go, Madonna has a new video, and then the video would come on, which they got for free. So you had this very high production value. People were spending, some of the Michael Jackson stuff was running millions of dollars to produce, but yet MTV got it for free. We said, we're going to follow that because we don't have money to do our own market research. So we started with movie trailers essentially being music videos, or the equivalent, and we got hosts, and we just took the music videos, which are really high quality. The best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie, most of the time the trailer was better than the movie itself. But we spent a lot of money, we said, we're never going to dazzle people with production value, but we can bring in hosts that people are either love or hate, but feel something. So a lot of it is not luck. I mean, we kind of honed in and said, we don't have a lot of money. Where do we spend it? And we spent a lot of time. So, people look at me and they go, Larry, you're so lucky you had all those amazing hosts at the beginning. Greg Kinnear and Julie Moran, who went on to do Wide World of Sports, and Katie Wagner went on to do Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and Mark DiCarlo went on to do Studs. That was not an accident. That was not luck. That wasn't an accident. We interviewed almost 10,000 people to pick the first 5 hosts. We put 7,200 people on tape. Then we used tape, and to get the first 5 hosts. So we said, people are going to either love or hate them. They're never going to know what's going to be on because we didn't have the kind of programming that people say, I have to be home at 8 o'clock tonight to watch E, the way you had to be home at 8 o'clock to watch NBC. But just come home from work, turn it on, and you're now in the living room with somebody who you like listening to and stuff, and you can kind of go in and out. We were doing short form programming before anybody ever thought of short form programming. We just started with that. And then once we were on the air and we grew, the first year we were the fastest growing cable network in the world. We were in 14 different countries. Everybody started, coming to us saying, hey, we want to invest in your company. We like what you're doing, which was the total reverse of where we were. And, then we said, okay, MTV started moving to long form programming. We said, okay, they know something we don't, we'll start long form programming too. And, so, the first show we did was Talk Soup. And when we came up with Talk Soup, and we had to do things that were inexpensive. I mean, because, again, we didn't have money and we weren't going to dazzle people with production value. So we would, when we told our own crew what we want to do, they went, you're out of your mind. They said, you want to do a TV show that makes fun of TV shows? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. And a lot of it has to do with basically my sensibility, which a Brooklyn kid. It's to me, Hollywood was funny stuff. Don't try and make believe it's rocket science. And so we had this very irreverent attitude. And then we didn't have really fancy equipment. So people would typically watch what we do and they go, oh my God, that looks so pirate. And I'm going, yeah, because we didn't even have enough money to buy broadcast TV equipment. We ended up buying equipment from a corporation that bought low quality equipment to do sales training tapes, and then they were upgrading their equipment, so we bought theirs for like pennies on the dollar. So when you looked at it, it looked pirate. I mean, because it was pirate. I mean, it wasn't what everybody else was using. And I mean, even the first, I think what really caught a lot of attention was the first Oscars, the Academy Awards, and we applied for credentials, and we were denied. And, we got message back like, oh, you're some dopey little cable network. We're not giving you any press credentials. Thank you. Goodbye. And we just said, you know what? We went and we climbed over the fence and we snuck into the Oscars.
Yes.
And we were on the red carpet. And, and we lasted half an hour before security caught us and threw us out. But what our interest was totally different. Everybody was doing, those 20, you get your 20 seconds on Entertainment Tonight, and it'd be, so Tom Cruise, tell me about your next movie, and we were there going, I don't care about Tom's next movie. I want to know like where he got those shoes. Those are cool. And, we'd be out there asking questions, and people would say, oh my God, we thought we were like a fly on the wall watching something we're not supposed to. And little did they know, we climbed over the fence. But that kind of brought a lot of attention to us. People were going, wow, that's really cool. That we're more interested in like what Tom Cruise does on the weekend with his kids. Then, because we could always hear about his next movie on Entertainment Tonight or Access Hollywood or something like that.
Okay, so this is fantastic. It sounds like you were picking out all the things that people do on the internet nowadays, 20 years before the internet was even, or 10 years before the internet was even around.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I look at now when people are going, oh, we're doing short form programming. And I'm going, yeah, I was doing it like 30 years ago. A lot of stuff, the interview, the intimate interviews and all of that stuff. A lot of what, a lot of people credit us with kind of being the beginning of reality, because we moved from, to Talk Soup. The next one was, Alan and I met this tall radio guy who kept telling us to come and watch his radio show. And we were like, come on, radio's been dead for 40 years. And then finally we saw it, and when we went and told the team, said we want to put cameras in this guy's radio studio. They were like, what are you kidding? I mean, radio's dead. And I go, no, you don't understand. It's actually it's a reality sitcom. There used to be a TV show called WKRP in Cincinnati, which is all about a radio show team that was hilariously funny. And, that guy was Howard Stern. Howard obviously went on to do pretty well. But, that was really the precursor to, podcasting.
Exactly what we're doing right now. I'm curious, Larry, how long did it take for E to become a profitable company?
About 4 years.
Okay. And then I want to circle back to when you were picking your host. You said you interviewed, I think, 7,200 people on tape. When you picked the host, one, did you know what you were looking for beforehand, or did they come up through just the shotgun strategy of interviewing so many people you just found one that clicked?
Well, the hardest part was finding the first one, because we knew we wanted to build an ensemble cast. But you had to start with, who's your first one. And it was actually a funny story. And, I missed a lot of things in my life. But I was out because we didn't have money. Alan and I had to go around the companies and pitch them on, cooperating with our new TV network or advertising. And we went to I went to this little low budget monster movie kind of company to pitch them on advertising. This is before we launched, and it was like a rainy day, and I went straight from my house, and I get to the place, and it's like a company that does like three $50,000 monster movies a year, kind of thing, and the receptionist says, "Oh, we've been trying to call you and tell you not to come. Mr. So-and-so, the head of marketing, didn't show up today." And I'm like, "Oh, well, is there anybody here that can make a decision?" And she goes, "No, his assistant's here, but he can't make any decisions." I said, "All right, I'm leaving." And then it was still raining. I said, "You know what? I'm here. Let me meet with the assistant. I'll give him the pitch, and hopefully he'll give the stuff to Mr. whoever." And so I meet with the guy, and I'm telling him, you could put your advertisements next to the latest Schwarzenegger film, and between the Madonna video, and he's like, yeah, but who are the hosts? And I said, "Well, we're interviewing people." And he kept going, "Well, how do I audition?" And I'm like, "Well, we've got a lot of people, don't worry about it." And he just kept being persistent. And I said, "Okay, next Tuesday, come to the studio. Ask for Eileen. She'll know you're coming in 2:00, and she'll put you on tape. And good luck." I just wanted to sell advertising to the guy, and he comes, and Eileen comes up and says, "Larry, that guy is here, and he wants to say hello." And just trying again, I had to figure out how to make payroll every Friday. I mean, we were not floating in money. And, I'm going, "Eileen, I'm really busy," and she come back then later and said, "Oh, that guy really wants to say hello." And I'm going, "Eileen, I'm trying to figure out how I pay you on Friday. Leave me alone, just interview the guy and, good luck." And she comes back later and says, "Listen, he's really being insistent." I said, "Eileen, what was it about get out of my office you didn't understand?" And she takes him in the studio, and she literally, now we had put a few thousand people on tape by then. And she comes in the studio, she comes back to my office and says, "Larry, we've got that guy in the studio. I want you to come." And I'm like, "Eileen, go away. I'm going to kill you." And literally just takes me and says, "No, you got to come in the studio." I go in the studio, and she cues the guy, and literally just, I look at it and go, "Oh my God, I almost missed this." Just lit the camera up. I said, the personality comes through. That guy was Greg Kinnear, who literally went on to have a pretty nice career, including an Academy Award. And Greg was the first one we hired. And then we kind of built it around Greg. So we said, okay, so we've got the pretty blonde boy from Arizona. Now how do we fill in this team? And so a lot of it had to do with the talent that we saw on the thing. Are looking at the ability for people to relate to those hosts. Like you take Mark DiCarlo, who went on to do Studs. A lot of people didn't like Mark. They thought he was arrogant and whatever. But you know what? People would tune into Mark DiCarlo to hate him. They would go, oh, we hate that guy, but let's see what he's doing today. And we were just fine with that. So we literally, it's almost like casting a TV show or a movie. We wanted a diverse look. Suzanne Kay was, Diane Carroll's daughter, and was African American, and Katie Wagner, is Bob Wagner's daughter, and we knew that she was a fashionista. That People magazine would report literally every week, what is Katie Wagner wearing? So we knew we would get press because we had Katie, and they'd be looking at her outfits, and they never really commented about a talent on the screen. They just would comment about her, being integrated into the Hollywood community and stuff. So she brought credibility and stuff. So whatever money we had, we threw the majority of that money into casting, and that's really what broke us through.
I want to ask you this, Larry, because I ask all the founders that come onto the show the same question. If you could break the growth of E Entertainment up into chapters and name each chapter, what would you name them and why?
Well, I mean, the first one's the origin story. Everybody loves to hear how we spent 3.5 years. I mean, literally, there's even one instance where, we pitched over 100 people. We were rejected over 100 times because we kept hearing
for the investment money.
Yeah, for the investment. You're not Time Warner, Time Incorporated. You're not Fox and stuff. There was even one meeting where there was a fund. And we went in and we sat in the conference room, and the guy was like, literally let us sit there for an hour. It was like the rudest thing I couldn't believe how rude he was. And came in the room, and then business plans had to be printed out. This was like before you really could do electronic. And we had like a 200-page business plan with financials and all of the stuff. And the guy comes in the room and goes, "Who sent me this piece of garbage?" And I'm like,
wow.
What? He goes, "Who had the nerve to send me this junk?" And I went, I did. And he literally took the business plan and threw it at my head.
Wow.
And, being a Brooklyn kid, I said, okay, the guy wants to fight, fine. So we just argued for like 15 minutes, because I just thought it was amazing that he would throw the plan at me. And then after 15 minutes, the guy just looked at our investment banker and goes, "I really like this. I'm in. Call me." And he walks out of the room. And I'm like, really? So there were so many stories that go with the origin, and then I think, the first year, getting it on the air. Again, 14 countries in the first year, which was unthinkable.
Wow.
So it was that. And then as we got money and how we evolved into, Talk Soup and Howard Stern and E! Hollywood True Story and Wild on E! And, how we moved into long form and, and we end with the Kardashians, with Ryan Seacrest in between.
So we have your origin story. That's just the beginning. What about the other chapters in the story of E?
You have the growth story. You have the international growth story, how we recognize that we were bigger than just the U.S. and how we went after that aggressively. And that was way before anybody else thought of doing that. And then, the whole era of developing programming, like I say, from E! Hollywood True Story to Wild on E! to E! News, which, still continues. And, so it's development of that. And then, then I think the Kardashians era is probably, the last. People don't realize, that in today's world, I would not start E! the way E! is today. I do not believe in linear television. I've always had this feeling, I say, look, to me, it's very simple where we're going. Do you want to watch what NBC wants you to watch on Thursday night at 8 o'clock? or do you want to watch what you want to watch when you want to watch it on whatever device you want to watch it? I said, we all know the answer. But you know what happens with a lot of these big companies is they're all big public companies, and they're so invested in old technology that's no longer the best out there. And you know, you have people there that go, you know, do I really want to walk in a boardroom and say that I'm writing off $5 billion in old equipment, and we're moving from being NBC to, you know, being NBC Online? You know, there are a lot of people that are not willing to take that chance, you know, because their careers are based on it. So a lot of the finance world really holds back a lot of innovation that, you know, for us became inevitable. We weren't that heavily invested in anything. And I'm not. I still, you know, I always said Hollywood is not going to be the center of the universe anymore. And that's why I went off and started companies in Russia. Now I have a big company in China. You know, and when I started with China, I would go to the studios who I all knew and said, hey, I'm doing this show. You know, I'm doing a show there. My first show in China was called Hello Hollywood, which is essentially e-news but done in Mandarin with a Mandarin host in Hollywood. And, you know, even the studios that go, Larry, look, we know we love you, but, you know, who cares about China? Nobody goes to the movies in China. And, you know, 10 years later, China is now, you know, or 14 years later, China is now the #1 movie market in the world. So I don't know how we know that, but, you know, we've always been, or I've always been a little bit ahead of the curve, really saying, you know what, it may not be everything today, but I could see where this is going. And, you know, again, I did it in Russia, and I had the #1 TV show in Russia for 11 years, and I don't speak Russian. And, you know, China, where I think we're still the only American company they allow to operate as in the media world in China.
Wow.
And again, because we don't take that we're not there to change their government or change their systems or anything there. You know, we just have this very irreverent attitude there. We're there to make people smile before they go to sleep. We're not there to change their political opinions or anything. So the Chinese let us operate there, and, you know, we like it. We're able to do stuff, and plus, China's a great place for us understanding where all this technology is going, because they're actually more advanced than us in media technology. I mean, when I do a TV show in China, 70% of the people who watch my shows watch it on a cell phone, and which is which has really caused us to rethink how you produce stuff. I mean, you used to be able, or I used to, you know, you'd shoot something and then you'd edit it, you know, looking at a 55-inch television set. Now we do final edit on an iPhone, because we realize the majority of people are going to see it that way, not the other way. So again, put the ego aside and look at what does the audience want us to be doing, not what do we want to be doing.
Exactly.
So, you know, we've been pretty successful there, and, you know, that's led to things like now the big thing is, you know, vertical programming. You know, instead of holding the cell phone sideways, you hold it up and people are doing vertical movies.
I want to ask, going back to your move to Russia, what was the inspiration? Because that was at a time that the Soviet Union just collapsed. Russia is now under a new government, under new rule. What gave you the thoughts and idea to go in during that time?
I was still at E. I had a friend that was a lawyer who had some clients that were doing merchant banking. And one of them was he worked in the Jimmy Carter White House. He was he was actually put in charge of the U.S. troops in the Sinai when the UN was patrolling it was a joint U.S. and Russian force patrolling the desert, keeping the peace between Israel and Egypt. And then when the Soviet Union began to change, it didn't fall yet. Him and the Russian general that he worked with, the Russian general wanted to start a media business and stuff. So anyway, so the lawyer said, hey, my clients are going to Russia to, you know, look at a business opportunity there. Would you go and tell me whether you think it's a real deal? And I went, wow, go to Russia. That's cool. I never thought I'd go to Russia. And so I went, And of course, the deal was bogus. It was like didn't make any sense whatsoever. But I kind of became interested in the place. I was fascinated. The people were wonderful. You had all this government stuff, but people were just welcoming, and they loved Americans at that time. And so I met the mayor of St. Petersburg, and the mayor of St. Petersburg, a guy named Anatoly Sobchak, said, "Hey, we're not really getting the funding out of Moscow the way we used to, and the kids in the orphanage and the children's hospital are starving. Would you help me start a music festival so we could raise money for the orphanage?" And I went, "Well, I don't really know music." And he went, "Yeah, but you probably know more than I do." And I went, "All right, that's probably true." And so we started this thing called the White Nights Festival, which is every June 16th to June 21st. And over the 6 days, we would attract 750,000 people. And, we did David Bowie and Sheryl Crow, we brought in all the big Western acts. And we raised 100% of the budget for the orphanage and the children's hospital. But, I guess the story people would like to hear most is, I was talking to David Bowie, and, because for E, I still had, great connections to all the talent managers and stuff. But I'm talking to Bowie, and I'm going, "David, we need you to play. It's a charity to save these kids from starving." And he's like, "No, I don't want to do it." I go, "Why?" He goes, "I don't like Russian food. I don't like cold. I don't like Russian people. I'm trying not to drink, And I said, "David, these kids are starving. You got to do it." And he goes, "To get on a plane for 11 hours to, play another concert hall, it's just not interesting." I said, "David, tell you what, there's a fort outside of St. Petersburg where all the czars are buried. The rulers of Russia for the last 500 years are all buried there." I said, "I'll build a stage over their graves and you could dance on the graves of the czars." And David said, "Yeah,
Wow.
right." He goes, "If you could do that, then I'll do it." So I went back to the mayor and I told the mayor, I said, "Listen, I had to promise Bowie he could do this." And the mayor went, "Yeah, whatever you need, just go see the vice mayor. Tell Vladimir I said it's okay." Well, Vladimir just so happens to have a last name Putin. So,
Oh, no.
so,
Wow.
so I worked with Putin on this, and we just got along great because here I am helping the children of the city that he grew up in and he loved and was fond of. And, I wasn't the American carpetbagger looking to make a few bucks and get out of there quick. And so then, obviously he went up the ladder and ended up in the Kremlin. And, then I was asked, they were very smart. They said, in order to build a consumer economy, we need to bring in the goods that people actually want to buy, which are typically Western luxury goods. And, they realized that they had to make media look a little bit more familiar to Western marketers. Because before it was like if you knew the right guy in the Communist Party, you did whatever you want, whenever you want. They asked me to work with the Minister of Communications and to rewrite regulatory policy. So, which I did, it was simple, like ads are 30 seconds, 60 seconds, Again, we're not dealing with rocket science here. I did that, and, then they said, "Why don't you start a music company here?" And we said, "Sure, that's fun." And, since we're doing all these concerts anyway, we started a music company, and then people said, "Why don't you do some TV programming?" And I said, "Nah, I got nothing to do today. I'll do TV programming there." So that's how we got started in Russia. And then, some years later, the Chinese kind of came to that same conclusion that they needed to make media look a little bit more familiar to Western marketers. They loved the Russian model because there was always a very clear, here's the line, don't step across. I mean, don't start doing like Free Tibet and anti-government stuff. And so they went to the Russians. The Russians said, no, there's a guy in L.A. who worked with us on it and stuff. So I got called in by the Chinese government to kind of help them with that. And then, my first real big task was I was teaching young Chinese TV executives the process of creativity for profit, which I just thought was hilarious. I said, what a great title for something. So I did that. And then, the guys that we work with there, who were all not the heavy-duty doctrine guys. They went to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and they said, "Larry, start a media company here so we could learn from you." And I went, you don't let Western media companies in here. And they went, well, we don't let the ones we don't like. I go, okay, why are you going to be so nice to me? And they go, it's really simple. We have a fight with Rupert Murdoch. It's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We have a fight with you. We go out for drinks. We yell at each other for one day, but the next day we're good. They go, for now, we'd rather do it that way. So they set us up to be an experimental company in China. And, we been doing TV, film, immersive entertainment, live events, concerts. So we do everything in China.
So 2 questions on that. Did you get the stage on top of the graves of the Russian czars?
Yes, we did. We did that, and it was David and a group called Snap Turbo B, and it was a lot of like disco kind of stuff, or the early days of hip hop, I should say.
And then I'm super curious about your thoughts, your ideas on Russian media today versus the time when you were going in.
Well, when we were there, it was the Wild West. In the early days, I got to admit, were quite dangerous. I mean, I think it was 1998. There were like 38 bankers that were murdered on the streets of Moscow. It was like really, really crazy days there. But everything was wide open. There were no rules, and the rules were being invented. I think now, my friend started this company called Video International, which became the largest seller of advertising on Russian TV. But there came a point where, the powers that be in the Kremlin wanted to have much more control, and they explained to my friends why they needed to sell the company and who they were selling it to and stuff like that. So it's moved back to the days of Moscow control, as opposed to being wide open back then.
Larry, I'm curious, looking back on all your ventures and all the things you've done over your life, what do you think is your most proudest moment?
People always expect me to say E. And financially, yes, of course, E, is probably, the biggest one. But it's actually in China. And I decided that at this ripe old age, I'm funny. So I decided that I'm going to write comedy. And I said, what could be more challenging than writing comedy in a language I don't speak for a culture I didn't grow up in? So I wrote a comedy, really is based on the contradictions of modern life in China. It's what happens when you have incredible economic growth in a short period of time, and people's social skills don't grow as quickly as their bank account. And we've seen that, with the Japanese and the Arabs, and, they go to Rodeo Drive and they Gucci this and Prada that, and they paint their Rolls Royce pink. And, so when you have new money and lots of new money, it becomes very ostentatious. It's like if you have money, wear it. So I wrote this story about a boy who grows up in a little village in China, but he's very good in math, ends up going better school, goes to Harvard, comes back to China and starts a software company, because now China is transitioning, in the last 30 years, and, from being an agricultural country to, being technological and industrial. And so I write this comedy about, this boy. He marries the girl whose father was the ambassador to the UN, who grew up in New York. So when she goes back to China, she sees a China she never knew, and so she's the fish out of water. And so anyway, it's all about him going back to the village that he came from, and it's a sitcom. And my partner in Beijing says, I want to bring this to the TV station. And they are the number one TV station, CCTV8, reaches 1.1 billion people, which is great. They apologize for the other 300 million they don't reach. But she says, I went to the TV station, they really like it, and they want to meet the writer, and I arranged dinner tomorrow night at so-and-so restaurant. So I go there, and, the guy comes in, and, he's a relatively young guy, and, probably 40-ish, and he says, he says to my partner in Chinese, and I understand a little bit of Mandarin, going, no, I want to meet the writer. This is a white guy. And, and then I go, really, do you think They think so. He goes, no, no. And then he switches to English. I mean, the guy went to Dartmouth, I think. And he goes, I just never thought that this story was written by anybody who wasn't Chinese. He goes, but, we're Communist Party television. I can't put an American story writer on television. I went, okay, great. 2 weeks later, he calls back and says, listen, I went to the propaganda department. So they said, we know who you are, and we like the story, and propaganda department says it's okay, we could do it if we want. And so we end up doing this comedy, and it goes 72 episodes, 72 half-hour episodes. And then finally I stopped. I said, listen, guys, I can't be funny after 72. I'm done. But to make a long story short, it ends up that year getting nominated at the Asia TV Awards. Ends up, we do this comedy, it goes 72 episodes. And I finally quit because I said I can't be funny for more than 72. And but it ends up getting nominated at the Asia TV Awards in the best sitcom category. And it's the only comedy from China that's nominated.
Wow.
And that's why I said, you know what, this is actually kind of cool. I said, writing a comedy is hard. In a language you don't speak, harder. Or a culture you didn't grow up in, really hard. And, it was the only one. So in terms of accomplishment, that writing that comedy was what I consider. I mean, with E, I mean, look, financially, of course, it's great. But, I'm going, okay, how hard was it to figure out that people around the world love Hollywood celebrities and Hollywood gossip? But writing a comedy in China, that's, there's not going to be many people who ever do that.
And it becomes successful, too. Larry, when picking talent, like what are some of the key factors? Because we have a lot of entrepreneurial listeners, right? And a lot of people building teams and looking for A players to come on their team to help them grow their companies. What are a few things that you guys look for, that you look for?
Well, the everybody's always after me because we've obviously been pretty good at picking hosts and stuff. Like most of our hosts went on. I mean, just look at Talk Soup. I mean, you look at all the people that have come through that. And I get people pitching me all the time saying, oh, I want to be a TV host. I want to be a TV host. And they don't, first you look for the personality. Do they have the personality that you think is going to break through that's right for today? Some of the older, you could be the next, Oprah, but does the Oprah personality break through in the internet world, technology? Probably not. But you find people, you say, okay, the personality looks like it's there, but then you get to issues of work ethic. So, people go, oh, I want to be the next Oprah and whatever. And I go, okay, do you realize what goes into it? I said, if you get a daytime talk show, you're going to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're going to be in hair and makeup till 5. You're going to shoot to 11. You're going to go home. You're going to have lunch. You're going to go to sleep. And you're going to do that 50 weeks a year. And I go, oh, no. I spend the summers in the Hamptons or in Ibiza, and I can't do that. Or, I'm getting, Botox, and I can't be, And you just realize that it's very rare to find somebody who can combine work ethic and personality. And then level of intelligence and stuff, and understanding what really goes into understanding that this is a business. At the end of the day, it's a business, and you got to schmooze sponsors and go to cocktail parties, and you got to do all that stuff. It's not just being cute and sexy. I mean, we've got one. People chase me all the time, but I was at a Hollywood event, and this gal approached me and said, oh, somebody told me you were the founder of E. I was just on E! News this morning. And when I heard you were here, I wanted to meet you. I said, great. She goes, I really want to be a host. And I'm like, yeah, you would get in line, you and everybody else. But, she just kept after me. And like I say, most people don't have the work ethic. And so I hear her story. 8 years ago, she was a single mom living in London, homeless.
Yeah.
You cut to 8 years to later, she's living in Bel Air, life coaching will.i.am and Steve Aoki and a whole bunch of other celebrities, and she's got 20 million social media followers, and Forbes named her the #1 woman under 40 motivational speaker and stuff like that. But but I noticed early on, and then I would be like in China, and like I would have an idea, and I'd call her up at 3 a.m, and she would actually take my call and stay on the phone with me at 2:00, 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, okay, I can't get rid of this one. So, we actually built, I've looked at, one of the things that's always popped out to me, there are only men in late night TV in America. There are no women.
That's true. I never thought about that.
That's true. I never thought about that.
Yeah, and they're all the same show. It's a guy sitting behind the desk, and they're doing so tell me, Tom Cruise, about your next movie. It's all promotional for people's next project. Yeah. But with Natasha, she's motivational, inspirational. I'm saying, you know what? In the post-COVID era, number one, we need women's views on television. But more importantly, I don't want bad news anymore, and I don't really want to know what Tom Cruise is doing with the next Mission Impossible. She's motivational, inspirational, and stuff. So we created a talk show about her, which the lawyers are all doing the paperwork, so I can't tell you the network. But it's going to go on in the summer, and it's a totally different show. It's not tell me about your next movie. It's like, let's talk about life and relationships and things like that. So that's an interesting one coming up.
But is there a way to pick out that worth ethic? Because with Natasha, it sounds like she found you and she was ruthless and never gave up. Can we pick out that work ethic, or does it just naturally, is it supposed to come to us, right?
I think, after doing it for so many years, I've kind of got an instinct there that starts me off saying this is worth investigating. And I put her through the ringer. I'm doing everything I can to shake her loose. Because the last thing in the world I want to do is, a nighttime talk show in the U.S. But I couldn't shake her loose, and stuff, and just more and more. She's podcasting and stuff, and doing all that stuff, and I instinctively know when it's worth investigating. So I manage not to waste a lot of time on people that just clearly are not going to have what we need.
Yeah, that makes sense. Larry, I want to wrap up here, and I want to address, we've talked about a lot of things, but I want to talk about any future projects that you're working on that you can send people their way. You said you had the project in China. You have this thing going with Natasha as well. Is there any other projects that you're working on that we can keep our eyes out for?
Strangely enough, after all these years, people have always been after me to write a book, which I did write. It's on Amazon. It's called Off Script. Never Followed the Crowd. But the here in the U.S. in the post-COVID, with my China company, I used to go all the time, but I wasn't about to quarantine, so I started doing stuff here, and I wasn't about to go learn how to play golf. So I started doing stuff here, all with a social impact component. So we did a series on financial wellness for millennials, because kids don't learn anything in school anymore, and conscious parenting, about trying to be a parent in today's world. But more recently, a lot of women that I know in Hollywood have kind of guilted me into helping them create a series, basically to give women a voice in media. Mm-hmm. So we kind of jumped into the podcast world. The first one we got up there, it's on most of the platforms now. I think we always put it on YouTube first. It's called Stall Talk.
Okay.
And Stall Talk is it's kind of a metaphor for this camaraderie that I think women have that us guys don't necessarily share. I've always been amazed. You go out to dinner with a few couples, and one woman says, I got to go to the restroom. And then they all get up and go, and us guys are sitting there going, where are they for 15 minutes? What are they doing? What are they talking about? But so Stall Talk is women of 4 different generations, and they talk about everything from feelings, relationships, to things in the news and stuff. And you kind of get that different perspective that women of different ages might have on the same subject. Mm-hmm. But yet there's that thread of underlying camaraderie among women that, like I say, we guys don't share. And that's doing really, really well. It was just picked up by Apple TV and Roku and everybody else. But the difference in that one is I've always kind of known that whenever you have a new technology, and I keep becoming new media every X years, I become a different new media, is at the beginning people are very forgiving of lower production value. But over time, I mean, now you look at how many people are podcasting. They put a $40 camera in their bedroom and they put a lamp over their head. That changes over time. People's eye and their brain begin to expect more. So with Stall Talk, I actually shoot it in a little studio that was built for podcasting with the audio is engineered, the lighting is engineered. We're shooting 4 cameras, 4K. We're live switching, so it looks like a TV talk show, which has caught a lot of people's attention. And now we've got a new one that's coming out actually next week or this week on the 6th. It's health, wellness, and spirituality, really geared to women 30 to 50. So what we do is we look for niches that are underserved by media, that the subject is just too small to support a TV show. But in podcasting, the cost is so low that, you don't need hundreds of thousands of people to justify the cost of making it. So we're doing that. We have another one coming up a month later called Boba Therapy, which is geared to Asian American kids, people under 30, Asian Americans, who live a very different life than people that are not Asian American under 30. So we're doing that. We're looking at doing something for people who are surrounding armed forces, people that are suffering from depression and contemplating suicide and stuff. It's like, it's not so much, those people need help. I mean, somehow we need to have mental services that deal with this particular issue. But how do the people around them support them and help them get through whatever is troubling them? So that's going to be the focus of that one. And, by the end of this year, we hope to have 5 podcasts up and running. So, doing a lot of that.
Nice. Sounds incredible. Larry, we're going to close it down there, but thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and your past, learnings and all the things. And also where we can follow along with some of your new projects as well. I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing everything. And anything that we can look out for on our end or the listeners that can support you guys.
Well, I mean, like I say, most people are finding the book a fun read.
Okay.
I mean, most of the when you read the book, people are coming to me and going, Larry, this stuff can't be true. And little do they know, it's all true. And it's really toned down versions of the stories. I mean, there's, the Russia years and stuff like that are really, really crazy. And, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't offend my friends enough so they never talk to me again. So everything in the book is true. And it's a fun read.
Especially that Putin guy. You don't want to offend him too much.
That's for sure.
All right, Larry, we're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much again. And listeners, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.